Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome here if you're new. In this video I'm going to share with you my mini chrysanthemum flower, which I feel is a very easy template to use. There are only two shapes. This is what I call the mini chrysanthemum petal, and this is what I call the center. So this is the overall flower itself. And the number of layers is actually dependent on you. So with my template I have a recommendation chart of how many to cut for each size, but there are ones where you can add more layers, and you can also choose to use less layers depending on how full you want your flower. The more layers you use, generally the wider you can go. So if you had more layers, you can probably pull back some of these so that some of these can sit a little bit lower in the flower and then have more of that characteristic mini chrysanthemum look, or I mean just a chrysanthemum look. So here I did use less layers. So each piece or petal like this is actually 6 inches wide, and if you're making it that large, you can really only cut one piece per 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. You really have no other choice. There's a lot of wastage of paper. So there I would tend to use less layers because I don't want to end up using that much paper. When you're using smaller sizes like this one here, which is 4.5 inches wide, you can cut like 3 per 8.5 by 11 sheet. Best use only 4 pieces of paper for this and then 2 for these. And so that limits the amount of paper. So I would say that the fullness of the flower depends on you, whether you're willing to cut the actual number of pieces, and also it depends on how big the flowers are. So this one is supposed to be a 5-inch wide flower because each piece is 6 inches wide. So I usually take off about 1 inch overall. So this is about a 5-inch wide flower. I'm going to typically use less layers here, but if I can fit more pieces on a piece of cardstock and use less paper, I will tend to add more layers. So another example are these mini chrysanthemums here that I made in a patriotic theme. These were very small, so I cut them at 3.5 inches wide. So it's about 2.5 inches wide per flower if you subtract 1 inch for the overall finished size. And here I did use 12 layers for the entire flower because I can cut so many more of these little shapes out of one piece of cardstock. So this is a fuller flower than that. And so it really depends on you. That's why I'm kind of elaborating on the fullness. It's up to you whether you're willing to cut all those pieces out and use more paper if you want. But if you want to use less, the overall finished look still looks the same, although these are just more petals. So that is up to you. So as far as assembling, it's actually very, very easy. So what I do is I do have 12 here because, again, when it's smaller and I can fit more shapes on one piece of paper, I can cut out more, then I don't mind using the full 12. In my sizing recommendation chart, you'll see that I do recommend 8 to 12. So this one has 8. I'm using the full 12 for this. So what I do is I just take 2 or 3, so here I have 2, and then I just curl the petals up slightly. And so I have a knitting needle here, but anything you want to use would be fine. And all I'm doing is just giving it a slight curl upwards, and then afterwards I'm just going to just press at the base. So I'm folding each petal at the base like this. So this will help maintain some of that fullness in the center as you add more and more of these layers. So you can do these in batches. The crease on this base fold doesn't really have to be, nice and crisp. All you need to do is just pull it, press it, and then let go, and then you can move on. So there's 2, and I'm going to do the same for all of these layers. So I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so from here, all it is just gluing all of these layers together. So this is kind of just a tedious step, but it's simple because all you need to do is make sure that you are trying to align it as best as you can. So first I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the center, and then I'm just going to stack. So I'm going to rotate each layer so that the petals sit in between. So this top petal sits in between the petals from the previous layer. And I'm going to rotate it back and forth that way So this one, I'm going to make sure that this sits in between the petals from the previous layer. And so I'm just going to repeat that for all of the petal layers. It's okay if you are actually not stacking them completely on top of each other. That's totally fine. It'll add a little bit of variation to the flower so it won't look completely uniform. But you can do this fairly easily and quickly. I'm going to go ahead and do all of that. As long as you're somewhere between, like any of these petals, in between the petals from the previous layer, you should be fine. And one reason why you may not want to use the full 12 layers is it gets really thick. So as you stack 12 pieces of paper on top of each other, it gets pretty tall. So this is what the overall flower looks like so far, and we're going to manipulate this a little bit later. So I'm going to move on to the center. So I have 10 of these pieces. That's according to my sizing chart. Again, if you feel like you don't need 10 as you're making these, you can use less or you can use more. And what I'm going to do is just add a very slight curl to the ends. So I'm starting somewhere in the middle and just slightly curling it. So the tips are going upwards. And I'm going to do that for all of the pieces. So this is really quick. You can double up and do 2 at a time, or maybe even 3. Right. And if you've seen my mini dahlia, this is kind of a similar concept. The reason why I'm making the center this way rather than stacking more of these shapes at a smaller size is because as you resize this shape smaller and smaller, the height of the petals actually shrinks as well. And to me, it doesn't look as proportionate if you're trying to make something a little more realistic. So here you keep the same height of the center, but then you're adding that fullness, and sometimes it doesn't close all the way in. So you can see here I have 12, but even if I press these middle pieces together, it doesn't quite close in. And I could adjust the size of this circle for this piece, but that's another SVG to mess with or another cut file to mess with. And for me, it's just easier doing it this way. So all I do is just glue each piece together. So I typically like gluing it so that all the strips are connected. So I do have 10 pieces, and that will be quite long. So what you can do is just connect several pieces together. So I'll go ahead and just stop here. And what I do is I start with about a finger's width to roll. So here I'm going to add glue. And you can see there that there's about a circle of about a finger, like a pinky finger. And that's what I want to start with. It gives me this nice little center here. And all I do here is roll. So as you're rolling, the tips of these petals are kind of curving inwards, and it's giving me a nice little center like that kind of forms like a little bit of a bud. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep rolling this. I am doing it quite quickly. It doesn't need to be perfect. If you are picky about your centers and you want them rolled perfectly, you can go slower. But here, that's my first 4 strips. I'm going to go ahead and glue a couple more together and keep rolling. So the overall idea is actually just pretty easy. You're making the center. These are similar petals. They're slightly thinner. And this, when we finish rolling, we'll add that to the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of glue and continue rolling. And this could be, obviously, like I said, very quick, or you can just roll it tightly. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because we're going to fluff up the center. So as long as it's rolled and you can hold on fairly easily to it, it should be just fine. So you can see I'm actually doing that really quickly. It's not tight by any means, but it works. So I'm going to add glue to secure it. And this is our center here. So from here, what I'm going to do is actually start bending back some of these petals and fluffing it up. So just bend back a couple of those pieces, and then I'm also going to press down a little bit on the center. So from here, all I do is just add the center in and glue it right in the middle. Push out some of those petals, and that is my chrysanthemum flower. All right, so you can have some of these pressed out just a little bit and just fluff it up, but that is your overall flower. So here's an example of a flower that I made stemmed using the mini chrysanthemum template. And this is actually a China aster, or I made it to look like a China aster, which is very similar to a chrysanthemum flower. So I used 12 layers, exactly like I did here. I did use less centers in the middle. I was still kind of testing out this template. You can see I actually could use a little more here to close up some of that center. But I actually used 12 pieces of the petal like I generally recommend. And here I actually started with white cardstock, and I took distress inks and added in all this coloring here to get the pink, shaded pinks here, a little bit of an orange, and then the yellow in the center. So there is a calyx here. I call it a calyx, I'm not sure if it is. But it's similar to the actual template petal, but it's slightly different, and it's just something you can add underneath your flower if you're stemming them. And it's really pretty if you just curl some petals upwards and some downwards, and so it's a nice touch to add if you want to stem your flowers. The inking process does take some time because I did both top and bottom of the petal. But if you want a tutorial on how to do that, just let me know down below. I can probably do a live stream on it. But the inking process was easy, just time or labor intensive. But overall, it gives me more of a realistic looking flower, so it's something that you can make also using this template, or just use any inks to add a little bit of shading to your flower petals to make it look a little more realistic. Okay, so that is my mini chrysanthemum template. Please let me know if you have any questions down below. It is listed in my Etsy shop. I will leave a link down below in the description box. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.